In you revive every dream. And just one touch, and I feel the power of heaven. And just one touch, and my eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that he can move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. And there's nothing that our God can't do. There's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a prison wall he can't break through. And oh, praise the name that makes a way. And there's nothing that our God can't do.
Come on, let's sing. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like the power of Jesus. I will believe for greater things. There's no power like the power of Jesus. Let faith arise, let all agree. There's no power like his power.
And there's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that he can't move. And oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Oh, there's nothing that our God can't do. And there's not a prison wall he can't break through. And oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do.
Amen. Turn to say hi to somebody and tell them you're glad they're here before you sit down today. All right, as you're seated, a couple of quick housekeeping things. Next week is a special week. We've got a vacation holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. Then Tuesday morning, we will have a special Martin Luther King Jr. chapel. It's going to be a lot of fun. Pastor James Lowe from Bethel World Outreach will be here. But then afterwards, we'll have our first dialogue event of the semester. So if you're looking for an extra opportunity to get a chapel credit 2 in 1 day, you can stay after chapel on Tuesday and stick around and hear about some of the things that Pastor James has been doing in the Nashville area with a ministry called Unite that is bridging all sorts of different kinds of boundaries between people and is a wonderful gospel expression in our city. We also have Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service that we had a video and it had a couple of things that were off on it this morning, but I wanted to let you know you can sign up for a chapel credit for one of your service opportunities. It's next Saturday, so not this Saturday, but the next Saturday. You'll gather together with lots of other students from different universities and serve the city, and it's going to be a great opportunity for you there. So we this morning are continuing in our series on Mark's Gospel, and today I've got quite a long passage that I want to read to you this morning that we are going to explore together, and then we're going to do something a little creative. Rather than having a message over this passage, we're going to have several of our faculty and administration that work in the healthcare area talk about the healing ministry of Jesus and what it's like for them to be a part of that, and how that calling to be a part of the healing ministry of Jesus comes to all of us in a various number of ways, and we're going to reflect on that together this morning. So I'd like to read Mark chapter 1. This is always the challenge with holding a mic and a Bible at the same time. So Mark chapter 1, verses 21, and we're going to go all the way through to the end of the chapter and see if you can pick up this theme of Jesus. Wherever he shows up, people just are made well in all sorts of different ways, all right? So listen for this. It's the word of the Lord. They went to Capernaum. This is right after he called the disciples, and they dropped everything and went after him. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," Jesus said sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all so amazed they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. And that evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he wouldn't let the demons speak because they knew who he was. And then you get this little pause. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everybody's looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let's go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That's why I've come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing. Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. Now, at the end of a scripture reading, a lot of times we'll have this kind of liturgy component where the person who reads will say, "The word of the Lord," and you'll hear a few people sprinkled throughout say, "Thanks be to God." I'm going to let you in on that little liturgy. So when I say, "This is the word of the Lord," you all get to say, if you would, "Thanks be to God." So this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. All right, we want to introduce our healthcare panel. Why don't you all go ahead and come forward today? You know them, you love them. We've got Ed McFadden, Tim Gaines, Aaron Hall, Charlie Taylor, our clinic PA, yes, and Christy Twining. And I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about what they do, but let's give them a hand as they reflect over this scripture.
Is this on? Sounds like it. Well, thank you all for being here. We hope you'll learn and gain some perspective from the event. I'm going to provide some big picture context, and then we'll dive into the discussion with the panelists. And so, did you know that healthcare is almost 20% of the overall economy? So $1 out of every 5 that you spend or is spent in the United States is spent on healthcare. and it's growing faster than the overall economy. So the second thing, in Nashville, there are over 900 healthcare companies. They represent almost $100 billion in revenue and employ almost 500,000 people across the world. So what does that really mean to us as a Christian community, and what's our role in the healing ministry of Jesus? So the first place I'd like to go, because we're talking about healthcare, is just to let each of the panelists provide you their definition or their perspective on what healthcare really is. So we have three practitioners, Dr. Hall, Dr. Taylor, and Professor Twining, who are healthcare professionals, and then Dr. Gaines, who is the religion and theology professor. And so, Dr. Gaines, I'd like to start with you. So what is healthcare to you?
Yeah, nothing like starting with the outlier.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the only doctor who can't help anybody up here. Healthcare for me largely revolves around working with persons for flourishing. I'm going to leave it right there because these folks have more to say on that than I do.
Okay.
So that was very brief. It's very concise. I like it. So for me, I'm a physical therapist by training, and I've been practicing for 15 years. And if I got asked this question at the beginning of my career, I would have just said it is treating someone's pain and discomfort and their injury, not really looking at the entire holistic view of what healthcare is for our patients. So when I started working with my patients and running a clinic, I really started to see every single aspect of health that is impacted by someone spraining their ankle, having knee surgery, or having a shoulder surgery. So when I think of what healthcare is, that is meeting a person where they come to you for their needs, hearing their needs, and then not only helping them in the area that I can help out in actually my expertise, but when I know that something that's above me, I need to refer out. So thinking of somebody that comes in with a knee surgery, they have financial struggles because they can't pay the copay. They start having to take off work. I'm now a dad of two girls. My actual oldest is in kindergarten now, and if my girl gets sick, I got to go home, so I got to call off work. So there's all these different things that go into play when someone that has something as simple as knee pain. So for me, healthcare is treating the holistic individual.
I am a practicing nurse practitioner. I've been practicing for 5 years now. Before then, I was in the ER, so I've had varying degrees of healthcare. But I agree. I think it's just supporting the individual in their pursuit of wellness and in their health. And then as a provider, I feel like our task is to make sense of what that person is experiencing within their body and then try to educate them towards healing.
I have been a nurse for 23 years, and I think the majority of my experience with healthcare has been in wellness and in trying to not necessarily treat acute illnesses, but seeing in how healthcare is anything we do that helps better the health of our community. So maybe that's not treating a broken ankle or an ER visit, but that's making sure we have food security, making sure my students in my elementary school had housing. Those were things that if a parent lost a job and they lost housing and my children were sleeping in their car, their health was going to suffer.
Thank you all. So I've always been on the business side of healthcare, and so I tend to think of it as an industry. But the companies that I've worked for, the ones that had that patient-centric focus are the ones that are most successful. And if you always started whatever you were doing, as an organization with the patient, then you usually came to the right conclusions and the right resolution. So thank you all. For Professor Twining, Dr. Hall, Dr. Taylor, what motivated you to get into healthcare as a healthcare professional serving patients directly? I'll let you go, Aaron.
Yeah, so I was playing baseball. I was pitching, and I got a ball hit right back at my face, and my front tooth got knocked out. And It was on a Wednesday night, and I remember it vividly that my mom let me skip church to pitch that night. So I got paid back by having my front tooth knocked out.
What happens when you skip church?
That's right. But my dentist was actually the song leader at church. So they had to rush, call the church office, and have him leave church to come back to his office at about 7 o'clock at night. And he looked at my tooth. I put it in milk because of the calcium. That's what my mom told me to do. And he looked at it. He goes, Aaron, open up. This might hurt a little bit. So I put my mouth up, and he shoved the tooth back up into my mouth.
I'm so glad I came to chapel this morning.
It's great. So
Keep going.
That's right. So I can keep going about my decade worth of trauma to my front tooth that is no longer with us, sadly. But that just seeing him selflessly come and help me kind of really piqued my interest in healthcare. And then in college, I went on 6 mission trips to Latin America and ended up leading a lot of trips and seeing the healthcare providers that we brought and seeing them not just give prescriptions, but just watching them interact with people and meeting their needs where they were. That has left an impact in my life that I can't ever forget.
God called me to medicine between my junior and senior years of high school, so that was really fun. I really thought I wanted to go to law school because I really like to argue with people, and I was like gonna crush it. But I think the Lord did not want that for me, so thankful. Probably a better person because of not being in law school. But if you're going to law school, that's totally fine. You're going to do great. But I just felt like I remember the moment at NYC being like, I'm going to use you in medicine. Like, I need you and your personality, even as sometimes cold as it may feel, or unwavering by the emotions and the realities of chaos in the room. I can tolerate that really well, and I felt like he was going to use that. And he wanted me to meet people in their lowest moments of life, and sometimes the scariest moments of their life, and to be able to meet them with some grace that he gave me, and hopefully I could give to them. So that is why I'm in healthcare.
My mom is a nurse.
Okay.
So as a high school student, I put at the top of my list anything but a nurse. My grandparents lived next door to us, and they had chronic health conditions related to diabetes, heart attacks, and had ended up being dialysis patients. So my mom was trying to work at the hospital, take care of our family, and take care of my grandparents. And so I kind of felt like I had always wanted to help people, felt called to help, was very involved in my home church, and kind of thought maybe that might look like missions. My uncle was the pastor here at Trevecca Church and said, why don't you come to Trevecca? That seemed like a great idea, but still trying to help my grandparents, and thought maybe I can go into medicine and just help that way. And so I kind of asked my mom, what can I do to help around the house? I'm a high school senior, help your grandparents. Well, I don't know how to do that. And she said, well, Christy, it's easy. You just ask them what they want, and then you give them what they need. So they're asking for ice cream, take them some vegetables. You don't always give people what they ask for. But I thought that was great advice. Came here, went on some mission trips through Trevecca and the university. Realized I had zero ability for languages, so maybe I had missed my call. And then just was able to really see my mom graciously handle and balance family life, because she could work 12-hour shifts, so she had 4 days a week to help at home, and it's ended up being a great life.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Gaines, but what I want to do is try to help connect some of the things that Jesus was doing in the Bible and maybe relate that a little bit to what we see today. And so, Tim, if you want to talk about just, he healed a leper, he cast out demons, he touched somebody and cured their fever and stuff. So give us some, I'll say, biblical context on those works, and then we can go from there. So
Sure. Well, I love that Eric started with Mark 1. Did you know that Mark was the earliest gospel to be written that we have in the New Testament today? So that's the down and dirty telling of the gospel. So when the first generation is dying away and Jesus hasn't returned yet, someone says, oh no, we need to start writing this stuff down to pass it on. I think it's fascinating that right off the bat in the earliest gospel, healing comes into vision. It's really early on, so it's really important to the earliest Christians. And then Mark does not let up on this. If you continue reading through Mark's gospel, and I'm sure we'll get to this throughout the semester, but one of my favorite stories is in Mark 5, when Jesus goes across the Sea of Galilee to heal, sometimes we refer to him as the Gerasene demoniac. One of my favorite things about this is that he takes his disciples across to the other side. Now, if you understand where this is the Sea of Galilee. On one side, where they start, is promised land territory. That's like where God's blessing was, where God's people hang out. The other side is not promised land. That's wilderness territory. That's where scary stuff happens. So I remember taking a group of Trevecca students across the Sea of Galilee one time, and I was freaking out because I'm looking across the lake going, that's the other side. And they're going, yeah, I know. We left that side. And no, like the other side. You understand? That's where all the spooky stuff happens. And so when they get to the other side, their welcoming committee is a man who is possessed by an unclean spirit. In Greek, that's a really interesting word because it doesn't just mean evil. Sometimes it's translated that way, but it actually gives us our English word for catharsis, like when you just got to get something out, you know what I'm saying? And you have this like healing moment of, I just had to say this. That's the kind of description that the Greek uses there to describe this spirit. And everything about this is drawing this guy into death. He lives in a graveyard. He's bleeding from his body. He's chained up. He's restrained. And everything about that is also deeply, deeply, deeply unclean for a Jewish imagination. That isn't just, ew, yucky. This has the potential of taking people who are alive and drawing them down to death. And what Jesus does in that moment is speak into his life and bring healing in a whole host of ways. And then Mark tells us later, he goes back and they find him sitting there clothed and in his right mind. He is deeply healed by all of this. So I cannot help but think that part of what you all are doing, and so many of you who are preparing to move into healing forms of work, is you're following Jesus into some of the scariest places, the places that need the deepest healing touch. And that's really central to the mission of Jesus in this. This isn't just like, how can I go get a paycheck? This is how can I be involved in the mission of God making all things new, getting in the boat with him and saying, okay, this is where you're going. Everything about Mark 5 is supposed to creep you out, especially if you're a good Jewish boy, because everything about that is unclean. He's bleeding from his body. He lives among dead people, which is all unclean. And if that wasn't scary enough, oh, by the way, there's pigs. A whole group of pigs that are super unclean. And so that is, in some sense, a signal to us early on in Mark's gospel, the earliest gospel. Hey, this is what God is doing in Jesus. He's going to the places that are being pulled down into death and restoring life. That is, I think, a central part of the imagination that I hope we are picking up at Trevecca.
Well, playing off on that scary place. So, Aaron, you talked about going, on mission trips and stuff, and then Dr. Taylor, you talked about working in the ER. What are the scariest places or the most, I'll say, trauma-related experiences you've had as a healthcare professional? And what came as a result of that? Just like
I was not in the ER, so mine will probably be a little bit more tame. But I think on the mission field, I was in Honduras in a very remote area, and there was a small island that we had to take a boat to, and the island did not have trash service, so they just burned their trash in order to get rid of it. And the kids had nowhere to play, so there was a 5-year-old girl who walked across a pile of burning trash and had third-degree burns on the bottom of her feet. And the doctors were back at the clinic on the mainland. It was me, a PT student, and like five students from Trevecca, from Lipscomb. And they're like, Aaron, you're the only healthcare professional. It's in your hands. And what are we going to do? We can't take her back. And so I had to pull out my wound care class. PTs do wound care. I had to get my scalpels out, and I had to debride a 5-year-old's foot with no pain medication to clear the burned trash that is seared into the bottom of her foot. And at that moment, I really understood because I was out of my comfort zone, that the Lord provides us the way and the strength and the knowledge to help people when they truly need it in the way that they need it. And He will use us in ways that we can't imagine. And so I think for me, that strengthened my resolve to be the best healthcare clinician I can and really approach each patient and each client with them being known and being heard. All this girl wanted to tell me was, help my foot, I can't play, I don't know what to do. And I had to meet her at that vulnerable moment.
That's a really hard question. I've seen a lot of different things. I think we tend to think of traumas and emergencies as things that happen in big chaotic events and these huge moments and car accidents and things like that. And that is very real and that is very awful. But a lot of people's lowest, darkest moments really arise in their own home. Sometimes it's because of choices they've made, whether they've participated in recreational drugs that have led them to be unconscious and they don't have people around them that are caring for them, or they don't have anybody around them, and so they arrive too late to the hospital. Sometimes it's an elderly person who doesn't have community, or the people around her aren't checking on her maybe as much as she needs, and she falls and she's down for a period of time unattended to, and even hours down can create a really gnarly process within the body that it will begin to shut down. And so there are big, terrible things that happen out and about in the world, but a lot of times people find themselves in really unfortunate circumstances just within their own home or within their places where they're trying to find safety, or trying to be in community, or trying to be cool with other people, and things can just turn really bad really quickly. So, yeah.
Well, Professor Twining, just kind of following on to that, you talked about your grandparents living next door to you and the health and the chronic problems, and eventually ended up on dialysis. What motivated them, or how did they pursue healthcare, or who pursued it for them?
For our family, we were very fortunate that we did not live in a rural area without access to healthcare. So we had dialysis that was a few minutes away. We had good family support, good church support, but their main lifeline was home health came in every day. And just a home health aide who really had no medical training, but who came in every day and kind of helped provide them with dignity. They were able to, take a bath or go to the bathroom without asking their grandchildren to assist. And for them, that just still helped them feel a part of our family. They were able to stay in our home and not have to go live away from our family, which they would have lost hope without that.
Yeah. And Dr. Gaines, when you think about the situations that Jesus was in, who were the motivators for those people to go see Jesus? And there's multiple, so, but take that where you want to.
Oh, you mean like the people who were seeking Jesus out?
Yeah.
Well, Christy, part of, when you talk about dignity, that's a part of Jesus' healing message as well, healing mission as well. I can't help but think about the Gerasene demoniac who was clothed and living in his right mind. Like, Jesus restored this entire person who was being dragged down from God's created purpose into death, being dissolved by these kinds of things. I can't help but think about the other people in the New Testament who are also being dragged down into death or excluded or pushed out or those kinds of things. Another story from Mark that comes to mind pretty quickly is the woman with the issue of blood who just has to push her way through Jesus. Also, so we don't miss it, she should not have been in that crowd because she was ritually unclean. Now, in the ancient world, they didn't understand what was going on with a lot of the diseases that could be passed along through bodily fluids. They don't really understand the biology of that. They do know, however, that if you touch a dead person, something killed that person, and you might pick up whatever killed them. Or if that person is bleeding, you might pick up a disease that's going to harm the entire community. We might as well do it since you talked about your tooth, but that's why they tell people in Leviticus, go outside and dig a hole and don't do your thing in the community because this is going to cause disease. So all that to say, for me, quickly, there's a woman who is racked with desperation. She has nowhere else to go. She knows she shouldn't do this, and yet she makes her way to Jesus just to be able to touch a little bit of that power. And the other part that's really important, Eric brought this up in chapel on Tuesday. The word immediately shows up in Mark's gospel all the time. Jesus is on the move. Immediately he goes there. Immediately he does this. When Jesus stops, pay attention. And he stopped for that woman. He's on his way, and he stops and gets down with her and has this incredible conversation about her healing. I can't help but think that as followers of Jesus, it's really important for us to stop and to pay attention to the people who are in most desperate need of healing. That's part of what it means to follow Jesus in his way.
And sometimes people do that on their own, right? Like that woman. And sometimes they need help. And I think sometimes for access is a huge part of healthcare. Like, how do we get there physically? Sometimes it's computer programs that people can't function, or signing up for Medicare, your 70-year-old grandmother who doesn't know how to function a computer. Like, it's super hard, and it's probably intentionally convoluted per Uncle Sam, but that's a whole nother conversation. But how can we even just physically get people there? Like, as a non-clinician, like, as much as the assessment and diagnosis and treatment is so essential to healthcare, it's also essential that human be seen by a healthcare provider. And so sometimes the best thing you can do is acknowledge that maybe that person's not doing well, or if I live in a rural community, knowing that we have no specialists within a 30-mile radius, and a lot of people don't like to drive to Nashville, I don't mind. So if I can take you to your doctor's appointment and I can just hang out in the parking lot or read a book while I wait for you, and that seems simple, and yes, it does take time out of my day, but it's really not a crazy thing to do for somebody, but that's a big deal. And so just helping people meet those gaps where they have them in their own lives, and just being transportation, or if they're telling you about their health condition that you have no idea what it means or what you're supposed to do or say or how to respond, be like, I'm really sorry. And that's good enough. So just remembering it doesn't have to be these huge healing acts, though they are beautiful. It can just be being present.
Can I point out one more story in Mark?
Please.
This is early on, chapter 2, when they rip open the roof and lay their friend at Jesus' feet. What I love about that is that Jesus doesn't look at him. He looks at the people who did the hard work of dismantling that roof just to get their friend the healing care that he needed, to lay him at the feet of Jesus. And he's looked at their faith and says to the man, like, so that matters for us as a community, how we work to bring other people to healing care. So if they can't make it themselves, what is it to us to make sure that people receive the care that they need?
Well, and I worked in dialysis for a long time. In transportation, if you didn't show up for your dialysis treatments, you weren't going to be well. And so, and like, not everybody has a dialysis clinic, 5 minutes away. Some of them are driving a long ways, and then there's home dialysis where it's like, okay, who do you have to help you with that process? So I think, the combination of, so Aaron, I would be interested, well, and Dr. Taylor, you talked about being argumentative, and that's why you wanted to go to law school. What do you see when people come and somebody else has brought them because they aren't willing to go themselves?
Those are fun visits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not making light of the situation, but like if a wife were to bring her husband in and he's not thrilled, it's like, well, that's a bummer. She's bossy. So we can kind of joke about it, but being like, what's going on? Like, do you feel sad? Are you frustrated? Are you not able to do what you want to do? Do you like to work in the garage and you can't do that because it hurts or because you physically can't get there? So there's ways to have those conversations gently with a little bit of humor, and just realizing, again, we want health to be these huge events, but sometimes it's just being able to do what you want to do and being able to do that comfortably. And so if someone likes to tinker in their garage, but they have steps and their knees hurt, so maybe we need to look at PT and we need to get you strengthened back up so you can go back to doing that, because those simple daily acts that bring you joy are essential to your being. And so if you lose the ability to do those things and know that they're just out of reach, that's really hard, and your psyche can only handle that so long. So
and I want to add on this. I started thinking about a patient of mine. I I had a lady that got hurt at work, and she was mandated by workman's comp to come see me 4 times in order to get her disability check and kind of get the ball rolling on her getting better. And she walks in. I have an hour and 15 minutes with this woman. She goes, "Don't touch me." That's her first words to me. "Don't touch me. I'm here. I have to come 4 times, and then I can move on and start my process." And I was taken aback at first, but then I immediately was just thinking, well, I actually responded back. I go, "Well, we're here for 70 minutes, so if I'm not going to work on you, what can we talk about?" So we sat in awkward silence. I'm really good at sitting in awkward silence until someone will have to speak. And as that hour went on, she started opening up about everything else that was going on in her life, about how her marriage was having problems. She was now hurt, and now she's not in line to get a promotion at her job. Her kids were having some behavioral issues, but she was there for her neck. And so at the end of that hour, I won her over simply by listening and hearing what was truly going on with her. And so I always tell my students, physical therapy is not just physical therapy. You are a psychologist and psychiatrist and financial money manager. We could do all these things, and a friend and a confidant. And so that's what healthcare truly is truly listening to what our patients' needs are. And I always want to challenge everybody that's actually going into this. We are not just treating people's symptoms. We got to find the cause of their hurt and really what's going on. And a lot of that is not a simple, straightforward answer. So it takes effort for all of us to do that.
One more question for Dr. Gaines. We talked about people accessing healthcare professionals. Oftentimes when something's not going right in your life, it's like, oh, I'm going to go see my pastor. I'm going to go talk to my pastor. So just share your thoughts on that relative to, I'll say, the current healthcare world, the mental health, the anxiety that people are feeling. Why do people seek out pastors, and what does that dynamic look like?
Yeah, well, there's some clinical studies that are showing right now that spiritual care actually aids in healing. And so there's a piece of that as well that I think many healthcare companies are starting to pay attention to, chaplains and hospitals and those kinds of things. It's not just being nice. Like, there's also demonstrated benefits for the healing of bodies that come with this as well. But I've sat in a lot of hospital rooms as a pastor where people are asking significant questions that they wouldn't necessarily ask when their body is just functioning as it normally does. I've had really long conversations about regrets and about what God is going to do in death and resurrection and those kinds of things. And I think there are certain kinds of questions that we probably need to start paying attention to earlier on. I really would hope that most of the room here, 18 to 22 years old, body's functioning fairly well for the most part. That we can wrestle with some of those questions earlier on than when we were in a hospital bed asking significant questions about the meaning of life or what God is doing in end-of-life kinds of things. Pastors hopefully are good at that. It is an awkward thing. I've also had to train a lot of pastors where I said, I'm going to go do some hospital visits. I want you to come with me just to sit here and to hear the stuff that comes out of their mouth early on. They're so nervous because they don't know what to do with illness or sickness or discomfort, and at the same time, to just simply rest with a person and be in God's presence, recognizing that God is deeply concerned with the healing of these bodies that God created in love. So I do think the pastoral ministry in healthcare is really, really key. I'll also say this. A lot of times in our society today, we relegate healthcare to, Aaron, you said it, professionals. And so many of us sitting here today are like, yeah, this is not for me, right? I know I pass a healthcare center on my way to chapel. We're right next door to one. I maybe would never even go into that building or think about going into that building. Friends, can I encourage you? Maybe participate in the healing mission of Jesus as a Trevecca student. Go into the building. Go visit some folks. You don't have to be a professional necessarily. All you need to do is to be able to sit with people and listen to them. I wonder what it might be like to have Trevecca Nazarene University start to participate more fully in the healing ministry of Jesus because we've got a healthcare center on our campus. It doesn't get much easier than that. So to be able to sit in healing rooms and hospital rooms and just be comfortable with a person who is experiencing some kind of discomfort or is in need of healing or dealing with a chronic illness or something along those lines, is not something that only healthcare professionals can do. I will say, you don't have to go in with all the answers. You probably shouldn't try to talk about why this is happening to a person. Just ask questions about life, and sit in God's presence with them, and that's usually going to be enough.
Yeah, my grandfather was great. He had the ministry of presence, and so when somebody wasn't feeling good, he would just go sit with them. Just, hey, I'll stay here all night. I'm just in the other room, but it was great. So, well, last question because we're running short on time, but Professor Twining, you've been in and around Trevecca for a long time. You know the community in which Trevecca sits physically, and it's a very underserved area from a healthcare perspective. So what are things that you think about in this community that students can get involved in or potentially participate in or just learn more?
I've been around Trevecca. I came here 30 years ago as a student. I came here and I remember my mom being like, is it safe for you to be outside? Like that was their concern leaving me here as an 18-year-old. I've always felt safe here. And I think that is one thing that as we've taken nursing students into Napier Elementary and working different places, I felt very safe. And I think that this community has done a great job of asking what is your greatest need, and then how can we help with that. I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's just, I always say, I don't really have any great gifts. I'm not a preacher. I can't sing. I have stage fright. So I'm never going to stand up in front of big groups of people. But I have the gift of presence. I show up, and that's half the battle, is just being willing to be there. Just this past year, since I am a new faculty this year, we have seen, we've gone into an elementary school and been able to minister to students. I've seen the Love Thy Neighbor Collective has been amazing. They saw that there was food insecurity here right on our campus with residents in the towers, and they met that need. They got a mobile food pantry to come bring fresh produce to those residents. So I think it's just looking to see where the need is, being willing to say yes. It's the story of the Good Samaritan, of just being willing to stop and take a minute to do what's right in front of you.
I'll just share, Dr. Gaines, my grandmother was in Trevecca nursing home when I was in high school. So we would come out here, one afternoon a week and then every Sunday. And I would just sit with her in her room. And, the richness of the stories that she had and the other people that were in that community was just, and it was just a ministry. It wasn't a ministry. I was just visiting my grandmother. But just the blessing of being able to do that. So,
can I ask what that did to you? How were you changed in that sitting with her?
First of all, I just appreciated who she was. And then the second thing, I think, I've always realized how little things like that can impact somebody else. My wife didn't grow up in that sort of fashion because she was remote from her grandparents and stuff. And so she's not as comfortable. I'm happy to interact with anybody, and just sit there and be with them. And so I think that's been a blessing for me from that perspective. So,
I can't help but think about the kinds of transformation that take place when you sit with somebody and just listen and you are present. This is a hard one to talk about without choking up just a little bit, but for a couple of years on this campus, out of the healthcare center, married couple who'd been married for several years, the wife couldn't walk anymore. She was in that bed, and every day her husband would take her down the elevator, and he would take her around the quad, and they would just take a walk together. And I just kept encouraging Trevecca students, get to know them. They have wisdom to offer you that it would take you years to be able to find. What is their story? Look at the example of faithfulness, the way that they're living their marriage vows until death do us part in sickness and in health, the faithfulness of him to take her out every day and just to be able to get a little sunshine. And I just think that there may be a kind of transformative ministry, if you might just take a time to go visit someone who is sick and sit with them and ask them questions. How are you doing? My name is this, tell me about your life. Imagine what might be able to happen in you as you offer that ministry of presence.
I think that's great. We're about out of time, so Eric, anything you want to say, or just Tim, you want to close us? And
Yeah.
give us
Hey,
a blessing?
thanks so much for listening in to all of us talk about this. We're pretty passionate about this, and we hope that you have found something in this that helps you connect with the mission of God making all things new. You have a role to play in that mission as Trevecca students, regardless of your major. And so we hope that this has sparked some kind of an imagination. Could I just ask that you stand where you are? I'm going to offer a blessing, and then we're going to go from here to participate in some more of God's good work. People of God, may you go forth to follow Jesus across the sea and into the places where healing is needed most. May you be given a holy imagination for the way that God is making all things new in and through Jesus, who sends you into the world now. Go in peace because God is making everything new. Amen.